After your father passed, the house went still in a way that was different from grief. It wasn't just the absence of his slippers by the door or the soft shuffle of his footsteps down the hall at night. It was something deeper, the kind of silence that breathes, that presses in around you and makes you wonder if you're the one who's disappeared. I remember sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the steam curl and rise in front of the window as if time itself had paused. The chair across from me remained empty, untouched, and I found myself still setting 2 plates at breakfast out of habit. I missed him, yes, but what I missed more was the way we used to decide things together, even the little things. What brand of cereal, which curtains to buy, whether the hydrangeas needed more shade. After he died, those decisions fell solely to me, or at least, that's what I thought. At first, the children came around more. I thought it was sweet how concerned they seemed. My daughter brought groceries, my son trimmed the hedges. They would drop by and walk the house with little furrowed brows, taking mental notes, asking questions I hadn't thought to answer. Have you taken your pills today? Why is the hallway light out again? You shouldn't be driving at night, Mom. I smiled. I thought it was love wrapped in caution. But the visits started feeling less like company and more like checkups. I felt watched, managed, observed, as if my home had become a hospital room with no nurses. I caught them looking at the expiration dates in my pantry, poking through my refrigerator, reorganizing things without asking. They meant well, didn't they? That's what I told myself again and again. They were only trying to help. Still, something felt off. I began to dread the sound of the doorbell. It didn't chime, it judged. And every time they left, the house got quieter, but my thoughts grew louder. I started hearing my own voice less and less. I'd say I'm fine, and they'd respond with lists of things I was doing wrong. I'd say I like this chair, and they'd roll their eyes and say, it's bad for your back. Every preference I had became suspect, every choice up for review. I didn't want to complain. That's not what you do, not when they're your children, not when they have families and lives of their own, and they're just looking out for you. But I felt something slipping my own authority over my life, my own rhythm. Even the colors in the house began to dull. I swear it. They convinced me to take down the floral curtains he loved and put up beige ones. Neutral is better for resale, they said, as if we were already listing the place. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Nodding became a habit, and with every nod I folded a little more of myself away. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror trying to remember the last time I bought something without asking their opinion. A blouse, a lipstick, even a new teapot. I couldn't recall. I reached for a cardigan your father once said made me look like spring itself, and I wore it to bed, like armor. The knit was fraying, but I didn't care. That night I dreamed of our old garden, the one they tore up last fall, because it was too much work. In the dream, it bloomed like it used to, wild and full of bees and noise and color. I woke up crying. You see, it's not always about one big betrayal. Sometimes it's the slow erosion, the dripping of doubt, the constant corrections, the gentle theft of your own instincts. I didn't feel like a mother anymore. I felt like a ward, a project, a woman-shaped checklist they were slowly completing. And yet, I still wanted to believe they were doing it out of love, because the alternative that they were doing it out of discomfort or embarrassment or a desire to control was too painful to name, at least at first. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes your bones ache. The kind of quiet that builds and waits for someone to say, enough. I didn't know then that I would be that someone, but the silence was growing heavier, and I was just beginning to wonder if I'd ever hear my own voice again. It started small like most things do. At first I didn't even realize what was happening. My daughter came over with a clipboard one afternoon. A clipboard, I kid you not. She said she'd found a checklist online, aging parents' home safety evaluation. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But she was serious. She walked through my house like an inspector, testing water temperature, checking smoke detectors, peering under rugs for tripping hazards. I remember standing in the living room feeling like a guest in my own home, while she made notes with her pen, tapping her lips thoughtfully like I was some liability to be managed. Then my son started talking to me about consolidating accounts. He said it was too risky to have so many logins and passwords. He asked for access to my online banking just in case something happens. I hesitated, but he looked so sincere. I gave it to him. That was the first password I gave away. It wouldn't be the last. After that, they started simplifying things for me. The cable channels I liked disappeared too expensive, they said. They switched my favorite news station to something they thought was more appropriate. I couldn't find my crossword puzzles anymore. Turns out my daughter thought they were too messy for the coffee table. She bought me an iPad instead, said I could do them digitally. I tried. But it's not the same. There's something about the feel of pen on paper, the little scribbles and smudges that felt like mine. Now even my entertainment was sanitized. They replaced my armchair, my chair, the one with the broken seam on the left cushion where your father used to tuck his hand when he sat beside me. They said it was unsafe, that the frame was too soft, that I could slip. They brought in a stiff-backed, ergonomic thing with no memory, no scent, no soul. I sat in it once. Then I sat on the edge of my bed instead. Even the kitchen changed. My spice rack, gone. Too cluttered. Replaced with 3 glass jars of low-sodium seasonings. My pantry was reorganized, which really meant stripped down. No more shortbread cookies or dark chocolate squares. Too much sugar, they said, wagging fingers like I was a child. I didn't know it then, but a part of me was shrinking. With every shelf they cleared, with every drawer they rearranged, they carved away a piece of who I used to be. And still I said nothing. I told myself, they care. They just don't know how to show it. I didn't want to push back and be seen as stubborn. I didn't want to be the difficult mother. But deep down I started to resent them. Quietly at first. I'd watch them from the kitchen while they moved through the house like landlords. They touched everything, changed everything. I'd see my daughter frown at my bookshelf, too many novels, she once said, and my son roll his eyes when I mentioned still doing laundry by hand, as if I were a relic, something quaint, something obsolete. They talked to each other about me like I wasn't there. We should get her a housekeeper. Do you think she remembers to turn the stove off? I'm not sure she's stable on the stairs. I was sitting right there. And yet my presence no longer seemed to matter. My thoughts didn't count. My preferences were liabilities. My choices, dangerous. Then came the little humiliations. They brought over those pill organizers, the ones with colors and days labeled in fat plastic. I hated them. They made me feel like an invalid. I'd always handled my own medication, but they insisted. They said I had a history of forgetfulness. I had one missed refill months ago. During a week I had the flu. But that was enough. From that point on, they were in charge. They changed my doctor. My own doctor, who'd known me for 20 years, said the new one was more convenient closer to their side of town. The new doctor was young, pleasant, and talked to my children more than to me. I sat in those appointments like furniture. I'd say I've been having more trouble sleeping, and he'd glance at my daughter and reply, "That's common at her age. We'll adjust her evening meds, her, not me." I stopped recognizing my own reflection. Not because of wrinkles or sagging skin, I'd long made peace with those, but because of the dullness in my eyes, the heaviness in my posture. I looked like someone waiting for permission, someone fading. One night, I opened the drawer where I used to keep handwritten letters from your father. The drawer was empty. I found them in a shoebox under the bed. Later, my daughter had decluttered. She hadn't meant harm, she said, but how do you explain to someone that those letters were my lifeline, that his words were my anchor in the quiet? That was the night I sat by the window until dawn. I didn't cry, not yet, but I felt something shift, like the crack of ice on a frozen lake, quiet but irreversible. I realized I couldn't remember the last decision I made that was truly my own. Not without approval, not without correction. I had become something they managed, a life they scheduled. And for what safety, simplicity, love? No, control. But control disguised in softness is still control, and I was beginning ever so slowly to resent the hand that held me too tightly, even if it claimed to love me. The hardest kind of cruelty to name is the one wrapped in kindness. It doesn't come with slammed doors or shouted insults. It comes with gentle smiles and soft hands that guide you away from your own choices, all while whispering, "This is for your own good." That's what made it so hard to fight back. There was nothing to argue against. Every time they corrected me, removed something, or made a decision without asking, it came with that infuriating tone of sweet concern, like I was a fragile bird they had to protect from the wind. They kept saying I was lucky to have them, and I believed that in the beginning. Friends at church would tell me how wonderful it was that my children were so involved. I'd smile and nod, but inside something coiled, because I didn't feel wonderful. I felt erased. There's a difference between help and control. Help listens, control assumes. And what they were doing, this slow daily disassembly of my independence, wasn't help. It was assumption after assumption, that I'd get confused, that I'd fall, that I couldn't keep up, that I was no longer capable of living my own life without supervision. And the worst part, they made me doubt myself. That's what stings the most. I'd find myself second-guessing simple tasks, making tea and wondering if the water was too hot, walking to the mailbox and hesitating at the top step, picking out a cardigan, then switching to something plainer because I could already hear my daughter's voice. That color's too loud, Mom. Even my memory betrayed me. I'd question whether I really did forget to pay the electric bill last month, or if they just said I did. They made me feel like my own mind was the enemy, like I needed a translator just to exist in the world I had built myself. One afternoon, I reached for the keys to my car, my own car, the one I'd driven for years, and they were gone. My son had taken them. He'd brought the car in for maintenance, and somehow that turned into him keeping the keys and parking the car at his house. Just for a while, he said. I never saw it again. No warning, no conversation, just gone. And I was left staring at an empty driveway, holding a handbag that no longer had purpose. I began to withdraw, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. I stopped suggesting lunch out. I stopped offering opinions. What was the point? Any decision I made would be revised, softened, or vetoed. If I said I liked something, they'd say, "That's nice, but you should really try this instead." If I didn't respond with enthusiasm, they'd say, "You're being negative again." It was a trap, a circle. No win, only compliance. And through all of it, they kept saying, "We just want what's best for you." That sentence began to haunt me. What's best for me? As if I couldn't possibly know. As if my years of living, of raising them, surviving hardship, building a life with your father had evaporated the moment my hair turned gray. I wanted to scream, I know what's best for me. I always have. But I didn't scream, that's not who I am. Instead, I started to retreat inward. I kept a little notebook. Not a journal, no, this was different. A ledger in a way. I began writing down moments when they made decisions for me. Moments when they helped by overriding me. One by one, page by page, I documented the erosion. I wrote in small, quiet script, late at night, by the glow of the bedside lamp, as if I were preserving the evidence of my own erasure. Not to show them, just to remind myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining it, that my frustration had a shape, a pattern. I even started to write letters to myself, little affirmations tucked in the corners of the pages. You are not weak. You are not senile. You are not a burden. You are still you. Because in their world, I had become a patient, a problem to be managed. Not a woman, not a person with her own weather systems of joy and grief and memory and music, just a to-do list with a pulse. There was a moment, I remember it vividly, when I looked at a photo of myself from 20 years ago. I was on the porch in that floral dress, laughing with a glass of iced tea in hand. The sun was on my face, and your father's hand was resting on my knee. And I remember thinking, she's still here. I may be older, slower, but that woman, she's still alive inside me. And I realized I hadn't spoken to her in a long time. Because my children had spoken over her for so long I'd stopped listening. That was the seed, the quiet bloom of something long dormant. I didn't act yet, not then, but I started to see, truly see, that what I was living wasn't love, it was a prison lined with soft words, and that kindness, when used as camouflage for power, is a kind of cruelty no one warns you about. The day I realized I was no longer the keeper of my own house came quietly and cruelly. It began with a drawer, just a drawer. The one by the front door where I kept the keys, coupons, penned old batteries, everything that makes a home run in its own lopsided way. I reached in to grab my notepad for the grocery list and instead found it bare, empty, wiped clean like a chalkboard. In its place, a neat little plastic organizer with just 3 pens and a pad, labeled Emergency Contacts. It was so tidy, so sterile, it looked like it belonged in a receptionist's desk, not in the hallway of my home. And I felt it then, not just annoyance, but grief, for the mess, for the life I'd made that was being sterilized out of existence one drawer at a time. I didn't even need to ask. I knew who had done it. My daughter had come by 2 days before just to straighten things up. She always had a way of disguising her disapproval with tasks. Let me help you reorganize this. I'll just clear this for you, it's so much clutter. But every time she did something I loved vanished. A stack of birthday cards, the salt shaker shaped like a hen that your father picked up at a garage sale. Gone. Then it was the mail. I noticed it first when I stopped receiving my gardening catalog, the one I'd subscribed to since before the kids were born. I asked her about it, and she said, "Oh, that junk, I unsubscribed you from all that," without asking me, as if my reading material needed filtering, and then the bank statement stopped coming. "We've gone paperless," my son said, as if we were a shared unit now. I hadn't agreed to that. I hadn't even been told. One day it was just done. I tried to log into my online banking to see the statements for myself, but the password didn't work. I called the bank. They said the password had been changed 2 weeks ago for security reasons. I sat there, holding the phone, trembling not out of anger, but from the cold realization that I had become invisible to my own accounts, my own money. The final straw, though, was the piano. It wasn't a grand piano or even a particularly valuable one, but it was mine. My mother gave it to me when I was 16. I learned to play hymns on it. I played lullabies for the kids when they were babies. After your father died, I played when the house felt too quiet, letting the keys hold my sorrow when words would not. And then one morning I walked into the sitting room, and the piano was gone. Just gone. In its place stood a beige armchair and a lamp. My daughter's doing, of course. She came by later with a smile and a tray of muffins, said she'd found a lovely family to take it a donation in your name. She thought it would cheer me up, make the room feel lighter. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, trying not to let the betrayal pour out of me like a scream. That piano wasn't furniture. It was a vessel for memory, a sanctuary, and she had given it away like an old coat. I realized then that my home no longer belonged to me. Yes, the deed was still in my name, but the rooms, the choices, the essence, those had been quietly stolen, like a queen left in her castle, but stripped of her crown, her voice, and her power. There were days I wandered the halls and didn't recognize where I was. My home was being rearranged into something unrecognizable, all in the name of care, all in the name of safety. And in every polite suggestion, every smile-laced command, I heard the unspoken message loud and clear. You can't be trusted. That message started to seep into me. I found myself reaching for permission before I spoke, before I moved furniture, before I lit a candle. I started asking if it was okay to do things in my own house, things I'd done 100 times before without question. Bake cookies, repaint the guest room, leave the porch light on all night. I'd call my daughter to ask if a certain rug was too slippery, if it was safe to use the kettle again. I was asking questions I already knew the answers to. That's how deeply they'd gotten into my bones. I wasn't just being watched, I was being rewritten. And then came the most painful realization of all I had let it happen. I had smiled through it, nodded politely, tried to keep the peace. I had let my silence become consent. But silence is not the same as surrender. Not yet, not always. That night I sat down with my little notebook, the one I'd started secretly late at night, and I wrote at the top of the page what they've taken. I listed the piano, the car, the chair, the books, the privacy, the keys, my own damn voice. And then I added a new list, what I still own. It was shorter, much shorter, but it had something on it that surprised me, the right to say no, the right to take it back. Because even in a world where your children start making decisions for you, even when your house feels like a cage padded with throw pillows and good intentions, there is one thing they can't erase, not unless you let them. Your will. Not just the legal kind. The kind that lives inside your chest, curled up and quiet, waiting for you to remember that this life is still yours. It was the doctor's appointment that broke something open in me, not all at once, but like a hairline fracture suddenly spreading its quiet crack through every part of me that I had tried to hold together. I wasn't even supposed to be nervous. It was just a checkup, nothing serious. My blood pressure had been a little high, and my daughter insisted I get it reevaluated. She set the appointment, she drove me there, and she walked me in. Like I was a child late for school. I remember watching her fill out the paperwork at the counter as I stood beside her purse in hand like an afterthought. I didn't even know what she wrote. She didn't ask. The nurse called us in, and I followed. That sterile smell, that dim lighting, I'd always hated it. But what I hated more was the way my daughter spoke for me, even before I had the chance. Mom's been forgetting things, she said, when the doctor asked how I'd been feeling. She's had some confusion, especially around her medications. I think we need to lower her dosage, maybe switch it up. I turned to look at her. I opened my mouth, but the doctor had already started nodding, typing away, not even making eye contact with me. I wasn't confused. I'd had one dizzy spell, and I told her about it. She'd taken that one moment and spun it into a diagnosis, as if my momentary pause in the hallway where I'd stopped to remember if I was getting the mail or going to make tea was proof I was slipping. And the worst part, they believed her. I sat on that exam table, the crinkling paper beneath me loud in the silence, and I felt like I had disappeared, like I had become an anecdote they were passing back and forth. 83 widowed moderate hypertension mild memory issues, no name, no voice, just a profile. When they asked me if I had any concerns, I finally spoke. My voice came out low, gravelly, but firm. I'd like to understand what you're changing and why. The doctor blinked, almost startled. My daughter gave a soft laugh, a condescending little pat to my shoulder. She just wants to be involved, she said. But I didn't smile. I looked the doctor in the eye. I want to be involved, because this is my body. There was a pause, a flicker. I saw it then, that subtle shift in the room when someone realizes you still have teeth, even if they'd been treating you like a ghost. The doctor cleared his throat, nodded, and began explaining the dosage in detail. And I listened. I asked questions. I took notes. I saw my daughter's smile falter. On the drive home, she said I'd embarrassed her. Embarrassed you? I asked, looking out the window. You challenged the doctor. It made you sound paranoid, like you don't trust us. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit, let it stretch out until even she could hear it. And then I said, I don't need you to speak for me. I need you to listen to me. She scoffed something between a laugh and a sigh. We're just trying to help Mom. You don't always know what's best anymore. That was it. That sentence. The one I had feared, the one I had been waiting to fall like a gavel. You don't know what's best anymore. Not I'm worried about you, not I want to support you, but a declaration that my wisdom, my judgment, my autonomy had expired like an old carton of milk, and once it was said, it couldn't be unsaid. We drove the rest of the way in silence. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair they brought, in the one they said was better for my back, and I hated it even more. It was stiff and soulless, and it didn't belong. I imagined dragging it out to the curb. I imagined buying my own again. Something soft, something ugly even, but something mine. I got up, found my notebook, and wrote in big dark letters, they don't think I know who I am anymore. And then underneath, but I do. That appointment taught me something they hadn't intended, that when you stop speaking, they fill in the silence for you. That the longer you nod and smile and surrender, the more your name disappears from your own story, and I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. I was done being patient. I was done being explained. I was not a case study. I was not a fragile little lady lost in her own house. I was a woman, a mother, a widow, and I was still here, still capable of knowing what I need, still capable of choosing what I want, still capable of reclaiming everything they were trying to take from me. And soon enough, they would see just how capable. It was my 84th birthday, and the sky that morning was soft with pale light, the kind of gentle blue that made you think of beginnings. I remember waking up early, my joints stiff but my heart oddly light. I'd always tried to find small joys on days like that. Not for the cards or the cake, though. Your father never missed a chance to bake something lopsided and sweet, but for the ritual of it. A day where you're allowed to be seen, really seen. But this one would end differently. This one would end with something inside me splintering so quietly, no one else noticed the sound but me. They planned the whole day without asking. I was told when to be dressed, what to wear, where we were going, and how long it would last. My daughter picked a lavender sweater from my closet, one I didn't care for too tight at the neck, and said it looked appropriate. My granddaughter curled my hair in soft waves and told me not to mess it up with one of my scarves. I smiled. I let them do it. I watched my reflection and thought, whose birthday is this really? The party was held at my son's house. Dozens of faces showed up, neighbors I barely knew anymore, church acquaintances who greeted me like a relic from a time they barely remembered. I sat in a chair they'd clearly placed for me, one with a stiff cushion and too much lumbar support, my own little throne of invisibility. People came by in waves telling me I looked good for my age, asking how the grandkids were treating me, offering polite giggles and cheap wine. But I was patient. I had learned how to float through these things, to smile at the right time, to nod with grace, to say thank you, even when I felt like an ornament. Then came the moment they all gathered around, clinking glasses, calling for attention. My daughter stood beside me with a box in her hand, wrapped in metallic paper, with a bow too large. I remember her smile. It was wide, performative, the kind people wear when cameras are watching. She made a short speech about how grateful they were to have me, and how much peace it gave them, knowing I was safe and cared for. The word safe stuck in my ribs like a splinter. Then she handed me the box. I opened it slowly, gently pulling the paper away like I always did, savoring the moment. Inside, nestled in a bed of plastic foam, was a monitoring device. A smart system, they said, for fall detection and emergency tracking. A combination of wall sensors, wearable buttons, and a tiny camera they'd already installed by my front door just in case. It even came with an app they could use to check in on me remotely. Isn't it wonderful? My daughter beamed. I looked down at it, sleek, white, quiet, a sentinel. There were claps, laughter. Someone said, "That's love in the 21st century." I smiled. I thanked them. But inside, something in me folded over and snapped. Because it wasn't a gift, it was a warning. A message that even on my birthday, even in celebration, they couldn't see me as anything other than a risk, a burden to be managed. They wrapped surveillance in ribbons. They masked fear as love, and in front of everyone, they announced that they no longer trusted me to live alone. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, letting my fingers trace the cold tile. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt this cold, expanding quiet fill me from the inside, a sort of numb, heavy understanding. This wasn't love, not anymore. It was ownership. That night, after they dropped me off and kissed me goodbye with those brittle, rehearsed smiles, I sat in my living room and looked at the little box they'd placed beside the lamp. The sensor light blinked once, twice, like an eye that never closed. Watching. I didn't sleep. Instead, I brewed a pot of tea, pulled out my notebook, and wrote, "Today they gave me a cage." Underneath that, I wrote another line, shaky but deliberate. "I am not dying, I am being erased." It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But that's what it felt like I had become a ghost. They were preparing for burial. All my preferences, all my memories, all the things that made me me, they were boxing them up, smoothing them out, replacing them with digital alerts and pre-approved routines. I sat there until dawn, the tea gone cold, the sensor blinking in the dark like a lighthouse for someone else's fear. And for the first time in months, I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to speak aloud. What if I didn't let them finish? What if I drew a line? What if I took something back before there was nothing left of me at all? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew this birthdays are supposed to mark a life. That one marked the day I began to reclaim mine. I met Joy 2 weeks after the birthday. My daughter had arranged it, of course. She said they were worried about me being overwhelmed, said I needed some extra help around the house. Not full-time, she assured me. Just a few hours, a few times a week. Just someone to check in. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. But I said yes anyway, too tired to fight, too worn down from the months of quiet battles. I kept losing. I expected someone clinical, another pair of hands to replace more of my own. Someone polite and smiling with a clipboard and an eye for everything I did wrong. But Joy was different. The first thing I noticed was her knock. It wasn't sharp or impatient. It was soft. 3 slow taps, as if she didn't want to disturb the air more than she had to. When I opened the door, she smiled, not the rehearsed, eager smile of someone entering a patient's home, but a real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind that says, "I see you." She was maybe in her 40s, with dark eyes and skin the color of warm wood, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore no makeup, no perfume, just a soft sweater, slacks, and a pair of worn sneakers that squeaked faintly when she walked. She carried a tote bag, not a medical one, just a fabric one, with embroidery on the side that said, "Kindness is a quiet strength." I remember thinking, well, at least she won't rearrange my spice rack. We sat at the kitchen table, and she didn't launch into an evaluation or ask to see the pill organizer. She didn't comment on the dust along the baseboard. She didn't scan the room for safety violations. She asked if I wanted tea. No one had asked me anything in a long time. We sat there, 2 strangers sipping chamomile, and she asked me about my husband. Not my blood pressure, not my mobility. My husband. And when I spoke, she listened not with a glazed smile, but with her whole face like the words mattered, like I mattered. I told her about the piano, about the chair, about the garden that used to wrap the house in color. I hadn't meant to say so much, but her silence made space for my voice. She didn't interrupt or correct me. She let me remember. Later, she asked me what I wanted from her visits. That question stunned me. I didn't know how to answer it. No one had framed it like that before. Not what I needed, not what they thought would help, but what I wanted. So I told her cautiously at first, and then with growing trust. I wanted someone who wouldn't tidy up things I loved. I wanted someone who would sit, not rush. I wanted someone who saw me not just the age, not just the pills and aches and safety rails, but the woman who still lived behind the thinning skin. She nodded and said, "Then that's what I'll do." Joy didn't touch anything in the house without asking. She didn't question the way I folded towels. She didn't sigh when I forgot to plug in the kettle. She noticed things, yes, but never used them against me. One day I dropped a glass in the kitchen and bent to pick it up, and she reached out gently not to stop me, but to steady me. She didn't take the glass from my hands. She just let me finish. There was a respect in that, a dignity. Over the weeks, she became more than a nurse. She became a witness, the kind you don't expect to find late in life, when most people have stopped seeing anything beyond the gray hair and soft voice. But she saw the corners I still protected, the bits of mischief, of memory, of longing I had tucked away. Once I found her in the garden kneeling beside a pot of soil I'd left fallow for years. She had planted a single violet. She looked up at me and said I thought she might like the sun here. I didn't ask who she was. We both knew. Joy didn't fill the silence with worry or rules. She filled it with presence. A quiet, patient reminder that I wasn't broken, just bruised from too much being handled, too much being decided for. She started calling me Ms. L, just that. Soft, respectful, not sweetie, not dear, not mama, Ms. L. A name with edges, a name that didn't shrink me. And slowly I felt something shift again, but this time not a fracture, a restoration. For the first time in what felt like years, I looked around my house and didn't feel watched. I felt held but gently the way sunlight holds a leaf. One evening after the dishes were done and the windows opened to let in the dusk, Joy said, "You remind me of my grandmother." I smiled. Was she stubborn too? She was powerful, Joy said, but no one ever called her that. They just said she was difficult because she remembered who she was. That sentence clung to me because I had forgotten, or maybe I had just been worn down by everyone else's version of me. But sitting there with Joy, a nurse I never asked for but somehow needed, I felt a truth flicker back to life. I was not theirs to manage. I was mine, and I was done letting them forget it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, warm and hazy, with a breeze that made the curtains sway, like they were remembering how to dance. Joy was in the kitchen, humming something low and sweet, as she rinsed a bunch of mint I'd asked her to clip from the garden. I was in the next room, flipping through an old photo album, one of the last things I still kept out in the open. The photos had curled with age, and some pages stuck together at the edges, but they were mine. They hadn't taken those, not yet. Then the doorbell rang. It was my son and daughter. I hadn't expected them, but that was no longer unusual. They liked to drop in now unannounced, as if this house had become an office they could walk through with clipboards and concerned expressions. I heard Joy greet them warmly and invite them in. I stayed where I was. I wanted to see how long it would take before they remembered to come find me. But they did not right away. They followed Joy into the kitchen. I could hear the voices from where I sat, just faint enough to pass for polite if I hadn't been listening for years. But I had. I knew the difference between chatter and strategy. What I heard was strategy. Not sustainable, my daughter said. She's getting more fragile, even if she doesn't admit it. She's still too stubborn to move, my son replied. But we can't wait for an accident. We could bring it up again, she murmured. The assisted living place in Cedar Hill. It has a memory care wing, too. She doesn't have to know that part yet. I sat frozen. I couldn't see them, but I could picture it perfectly. My daughter leaning against the counter, arms crossed, wearing that face she made when she thought she was being reasonable. My son nodding, tapping his phone to pull up some brochure or email. They were making plans. Not just suggestions, plans. I waited. I wanted to see what Joy would say. There was a pause, then her voice steady and slow. Has she said she wants to move? Another silence, then a laugh awkward. She's not really in a position to decide that anymore. Joy didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. But when she spoke again, it landed like a stone in still water. With all due respect, she's in exactly the position to decide that. I closed the album, my hands trembling not with fear, but something more electric, more alive. They didn't reply right away. I imagined the glance between them, the tightening of jaws, the sudden shift in the room's temperature when someone calls your bluff. She's lucky to have you, my son finally said. Joy's voice was soft but firm. I'm lucky to know her. That was it. That was the moment. Not the moment everything changed, not yet, but the moment I knew I wasn't alone. That someone had heard the truth beneath my silence and chose to stand beside it. She hadn't defended me out of pity. She had defended my right to be listened to. When they finally came into the living room, I was sitting very still, the album on my lap, the page open to a photo of me and their father in the old garden, arms tangled in laughter. My daughter smiled too wide. My son kissed my cheek. They sat beside me and began asking how I'd been, how my sleep was, whether I'd thought more about the next stage. Their words had edges wrapped in cotton, but I could feel the sharpness underneath. And I surprised myself. I didn't nod. I didn't stall or pretend. I said I heard you. Their faces froze. I let the silence settle heavy and clean. I heard what you said to Joy, about Cedar Hill, about deciding for me. Mom. My daughter began, her voice softening, weaponizing concern. No, I said, stop. They blinked as if I'd spoken in a language they hadn't realized I still knew. I am not moving, I said. I am not being tucked away because it's easier for you, and I am not confused. I am angry, because I've let you dress control in the language of love for far too long. Joy was in the hallway, quiet, unseen, but present. I felt her there, a lighthouse behind me. My son tried to pivot. We just don't want you to be alone. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. And with that, I stood. My knees ached. My hip gave a little protest, but I stood tall anyway. They looked at each other, like maybe they hadn't come prepared for this version of me, the one who wasn't waiting for permission to speak. Things are going to change, I said. And I meant it. That night, I found Joy in the kitchen slicing fruit for the next day. Thank you, I said. She didn't ask for what. She just smiled and said, it's your house. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, something I hadn't done in ages. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That was the difference. I sat at the edge of my bed, bare feet on cool floorboards, and listened to the silence. Not the stifling kind I'd grown used to. This was a different silence, ripe, waiting like the breath before a note is played. And I heard it, my voice, not aloud, not yet, but inside. I could feel it stirring like an old bird stretching her wings. So I started small. First, I took back breakfast. I told Joy I'd make it myself that morning. She smiled and stepped aside without a word. I boiled the water, sliced the toast just the way I liked it, thick with too much butter, and spread jam without guilt. I sat at the kitchen table in the soft light, chewing slowly, deliberately, like each bite was a declaration. I am still here. I still choose. Then I went to the closet. I pulled out the yellow cardigan, the one they said was too bright for someone my age. I wore it with my old brooch, the one with the chipped pearl, and walked down the hall like royalty. Not for anyone else, just for me. Later that afternoon, my daughter called. She wanted to come by to check on a few things. I told her no. There was silence on the line. No, she echoed as if I'd spoken a foreign word. That's right, I said, steady. I'm resting today. You can come later in the week, but I'll let you know when. I could hear her blinking through the phone. I just thought you'd want the company. I have company, I said. I have myself, and that's enough for today. She didn't argue. Not really. Just said, all right, in that clipped tone she uses when the conversation doesn't go her way. When she hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen and let the quiet flood back in. And I didn't apologize to it. I started keeping a new list in my notebook, things I did without asking. It became a little ritual. Wore red lipstick, opened all the windows, played old jazz records loud enough to hear from the porch, canceled the delivery service they'd signed me up for without asking, rearranged the bookshelf the way I liked it, spines forward, messy, alive. Each act was a reclamation, a flag planted. I started saying no more often, not out of spite, but out of truth. No to the food they brought that I didn't enjoy. No to their sudden visits. No to the way they explained things to me like I was a toddler. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply began asserting that I had the right to my own life. And just as importantly, I started saying yes again. Yes to the old garden chair I found in the shed and dragged back into the sun. Yes to baking sugar and all. Yes to the letters I wrote to myself in the evenings, little love notes folded and tucked into books I hadn't opened in years. Yes to calling old friends, even if the calls were clumsy and full of static. Yes to stories, to laughter, to remembering how much life there still was in this old house. Joy noticed the shift, too. One day she found me in the front yard clipping roses with my gloves on dirt under my nails, a smear of soil across my cheek. She didn't stop me. She didn't say, "Be careful." She just handed me a small pair of shears and said, "You missed one." And oh, how I adored her for that. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror later that week. Not the full-length kind they'd installed in the bathroom for safety, no. This was the little round one by the front door, the one with the gilt edges and dusty frame. I saw my face in it lined soft proud, and I whispered, "Welcome back." There was still resistance, of course. My son dropped by unannounced and found me alone in the backyard pruning bushes. He made a face, said something about overexertion. I looked him square in the eye and said, "If I fall, I fall. But at least I'll fall doing something that's mine." He didn't know what to do with that. And that was fine. This wasn't about convincing them anymore. It was about remembering myself. I began writing again, not just notes, but little stories about my childhood, about your father, about the time I caught the cat climbing the drapes and laughed so hard I nearly fell over. I wrote poems badly. I wrote thoughts. I wrote down the dreams I'd had and forgotten, and I read them aloud to Joy sometimes, who never interrupted, just listened with her hands folded and her eyes soft. This voice, my voice, hadn't been gone. It had just been waiting, beneath the weight of obligation, beneath the silence they thought was surrender. And now I was letting it out again, not to shout, but to reclaim. Because when you've spent years being spoken over, every word you say with intention becomes a revolution. And in those quiet acts, those no's and yeses, those little rebellions of dignity, I was rebuilding the parts of me they tried to manage into extinction. It had been years since I touched that folder. It lived in the locked drawer of the old sideboard, buried beneath insurance papers, birth certificates, and other forgotten testaments to a life well managed. I'd placed it there after your father passed, after we sat together in the lawyer's office and went over every detail like two people planning a final gift. The will had been written with love, our love for our children, for the family we built. We wanted to leave them something that said, "We trusted you." But trust wears down, doesn't it? That morning, something pulled me toward the drawer. Maybe it was the breeze from the window. Maybe it was a dream I couldn't quite remember. But I walked to that sideboard with purpose and unlocked it with the little brass key that still hung from my keychain. The paper was yellowing at the edges, the ink faded in spots. I sat down at the kitchen table and laid it out before me like a map to a country I no longer believed in. Their names were all there. My son, my daughter, equal shares, our accounts, the house, the savings. All of it parceled out neatly, like lines in a song we thought they would honor. I could hear your father's voice in the words, his fairness, his optimism. His belief that if you give people something of value, they'll treat it as sacred. But looking at those pages, I felt none of that. What I felt was emptiness. Because what good is an inheritance when the people receiving it have already taken so much more than money? They'd taken my agency, my voice, my rhythm, my autonomy. They'd wrapped it all in silk and said it was care. But love, true love, does not overwrite you. They hadn't protected me. They had smothered me. And now here I was staring at a document that would reward them for it. I read the whole thing, every line. I read it like a stranger, and by the end I knew this no longer reflected me. This was the will of a woman who still believed in the best of them. I wasn't that woman anymore, and maybe I never truly was. I closed the folder and sat there in silence. My tea had gone cold. The light outside had shifted. Joy came in quietly and saw the paper on the table. She didn't ask. She just sat down beside me and waited. After a while, I said, I think I've been trying to outlove people who have already decided how small they want me to be. Joy didn't speak. She didn't need to. I opened the folder again. I took a pen from the drawer, and I wrote across the front, to be revised, immediately. That night I called my lawyer. The voice on the other end was the same kind man who'd helped us all those years ago. He sounded surprised to hear from me. I told him I wanted to make changes. He asked what kind. I said, all of it. He hesitated, asked if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more certain. We set an appointment. The next few days passed in a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not the calm they tried to build for me with pill boxes and video monitors, but the calm of someone stepping back into the center of her own life. I sorted through papers. I gathered documents. I made lists not of assets, but of truths. Truth, my children had used my age as an excuse to silence me. Truth. They made decisions with my name, but not with my permission. Truth, joy, in a matter of weeks, had given me more dignity than they had in years. It wasn't about punishment. I wasn't rewriting my will to hurt anyone. I was rewriting it to honor the woman I had become, the one who had finally remembered that her life and what she left behind belonged to her. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I wore the red scarf they hated. I walked in with my cane, my notes, and my voice steady in my chest. The receptionist smiled politely, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Maybe she expected someone frail. Instead, she got someone reborn. We went over everything, line by line. The accounts reallocated. The house conditional. The bulk of my savings reserved not for blood but for loyalty. And then came the name, Joy. I said it aloud, clear as bells in winter. He paused. Your nurse, he asked. I nodded. My family. He didn't argue. He only asked, how would you like it stated? And I told him exactly how. By the time I left, the new papers were drafted. My fingers trembled as I signed, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what it meant. This wasn't revenge. It was recognition. When I stepped outside, the wind was brisk. The sun cut through the clouds, just enough to make the pavement shimmer. I looked up, breathed in deep, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in years, the future felt like mine again. And I couldn't wait to see what came next. I've turned this decision over in my hands 100 times, like a stone I keep in my pocket, smooth from all the quiet ways I've tried to explain it to myself. Choosing joy wasn't impulsive. It wasn't petty or emotional or born from anger. No, it came from something far older, something deeper than disappointment. It came from knowing what love feels like after everything else has been stripped away. You see, people think inheritance is about money, assets, numbers in an account that somehow measure worth. But that's not what it is. Not really. Inheritance is legacy. It's trust extended beyond your last breath. It's the final word you speak without being there to explain it. And I couldn't bear the thought that my final word would be a lie. My children, they were raised in love. I gave them laughter, warmth, stories at bedtime, soup when they were sick, and the kind of devotion that cost me parts of myself I never got back. I wiped every tear. I sewed every costume. I showed up year after year, even when I was tired, even when I wasn't sure who I was anymore, except someone's mother. And somewhere along the way they stopped seeing me as a whole person. I became a duty, a checklist, something to preserve like a family heirloom, safe, quiet, undemanding. But Joy, she saw the whole of me, not just what I had left. She never treated me like a relic. She treated me like a woman, with stories, flaws, hunger, humor, grief. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask, what I missed, what I feared, what I longed for. And she never tried to fix me. She just sat beside me while I remembered how to fix myself. There was a morning I won't forget. I had one of those aches that comes deep in the hip, the kind that stiffens you to the bone. I was grouchy, snapping, not in the mood for anything. Joy came in with warm hands and a bowl of water steeped with lavender. She didn't speak. She just soaked a cloth, knelt, and pressed it gently to my leg. I didn't ask her to. She didn't need thanks. It wasn't about duty. It was care, pure, honest care. And that's what changed me. My daughter brings groceries and lectures. My son sends reminders and rolls his eyes when I forget the name of an actor. But Joy sees my pain and doesn't look away. She sits with it. She honors it. She doesn't shame it into silence. I thought long and hard about what it means to name someone in your will, and I realized I wanted to give back to someone who had given without asking for anything in return. Joy never asked me about money, never hinted, never fished. In fact, I suspect she would be horrified if she knew what I was planning before I told her. But I did it anyway. Because this isn't about obligation, it's about truth. She deserves it. Not because she wiped my counters or brewed my tea just right, but because she reminded me I still had a voice. She gave me the space to use it again. And if that's not the kind of person you leave a legacy to, then who is? I thought about what my husband would say. I imagined him sitting at the edge of the bed, rubbing my knee like he used to when I was restless with worry. And I could almost hear him chuckle soft and low and say, if someone makes you feel seen again, they've already given you a fortune. Give them one back. And so I did. I rewrote the will to reflect the life I'm living now, not the one I imagined, when I still believed my children would never treat me like a fragile inconvenience. I left the house in trust. If Joy ever chooses to move, she can sell it or keep it. It's hers to decide. I left funds set aside for her to continue the quiet, generous work she does for others, because people like her are rare. They are gold wrapped in wool and calloused hands. They shouldn't have to struggle just because they chose compassion over career climbing. I even included a note in the document, handwritten, sealed, so that if the children ever read it, they'd know exactly why. It says, to my children, I gave you everything I had while I was alive. My time, my energy, my love. I hoped it would be enough to teach you how to love in return. But you loved, through control. And I need to leave something behind for the person who loved me in freedom. This isn't revenge. It's clarity. It's the last choice I get to make with full knowledge and open eyes. I hope one day you understand. I don't know if they will, but that's no longer my burden. I made my choice not out of bitterness, but out of integrity. And in that choice, I gave something back to myself too, the proof that I still know what's right. I invited them over myself, my children. I set the table with mismatched teacups and an old lace cloth your father and I bought at a market long ago. I even lit the candle, the one they always said was a fire hazard. I wanted the air to be warm, flickering. I wanted the room to feel like it used to, before they began rearranging everything into something tidy and lifeless. They arrived together, which already told me something. A coordinated front, my daughter with her lips tight and polite, my son with that casual tone he uses when he's pretending not to be annoyed. I greeted them the same way I used to greet guests in the days when hospitality was an art, not an obligation. I smiled. I asked them to sit. I poured the tea. And then I told them what I'd done. "I've rewritten my will," I said. The words were soft, not cruel, not angry, just still, like a pond with no ripples. My daughter set her cup down with a clink already bracing. My son didn't look surprised, just unsettled, like someone who hears a sound in the distance and knows it's heading their way. "I'm leaving the house to Joy," I said. I let the silence settle around us like snowfall. "She's the nurse," my daughter said after a moment, as if I'd forgotten. "She's more than that," I replied. "She's the only person who's treated me like I still belong to myself." They tried to mask it, but I saw the flickers hurt confusion, and yes, insult. I expected it. They saw the will as theirs, as inevitable, as their reward for being involved. My son leaned forward. "We've been here, every week. We've done everything for you." I nodded. "Yes, you've done a lot. But you never asked what I wanted. You never listened when I said no. You decided what was best, then called it love." He flushed his jaw, tightening. My daughter's voice softened a tactic I'd known since she was a child. "Mom, are you sure she hasn't manipulated you? You're vulnerable." That one hurt, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how little they thought of me. "I'm not vulnerable," I said. "I've been invisible. There's a difference." They tried everything after that guilt logic worry disguised as concern. They asked about taxes, about fairness, about what people might think. My daughter even tried tears, not real ones, the kind that arrive when control begins to slip. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I simply said, "This isn't up for discussion." And then, because I wanted it to be understood, not just heard, I added, "You forgot who I am." I didn't. The words seemed to stun them. They sat there blinking at me like they were seeing me for the first time in years. And maybe they were. Maybe they'd grown so used to the quiet, agreeable version of me that they'd forgotten I'd once built this home with my own hands, paid bills, fought battles, buried a husband, survived heartbreak. I wasn't a soft thing to manage. I was a woman with history, with teeth, with will. They didn't stay long after that. There weren't slammed doors or shouted accusations, just two grown children rising from the table not knowing how to leave without winning. My daughter hugged me like I was breakable glass. My son didn't hug me at all. He just nodded cold and stiff and left with a sigh that said more than words ever could. When the door closed, I stood for a long while, one hand resting on the back of the chair where Joy often sat. The candle still flickered quiet and golden, and I let its warmth settle into my skin. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't shamed them. I had simply chosen the truth. And the truth was, this love without respect is not love, and help without consent is not kindness. Joy arrived later that evening. She noticed the cups on the table, the slightly crooked lace. She didn't ask what had happened. I told her anyway. I told them everything I said, about the will, about you. She froze halfway to the sink, and she asked, her voice barely a breath. "They didn't like it," I said. She stood there for a moment, her back to me, and then in the stillness of the room she whispered, "I never asked for any of it." "I know," I said. "That's why you deserve it." She turned tears in her eyes, and I saw it, that look people wear when they've been carrying a weight they didn't even know they were carrying, until someone offers to share it. I reached out and touched her hand. "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it for me, so that when I'm gone, my last act won't be silence, it'll be truth." She didn't speak. She didn't have to. We just stood there, two women in a quiet kitchen lit by candlelight and hard-won clarity. They didn't call for 3 days. After our tea table confrontation, the phone stayed silent, and I didn't chase it. I didn't reach out to soften the blow or smooth the discomfort. I let the quiet come, let it stretch across the rooms like a long exhale. For once, I wasn't afraid of it. It wasn't punishment, it was peace. But on the fourth day, the silence cracked. My son called, not to apologize, but to clarify. That's the word he used. I just want to clarify what's going on, as if it were a misunderstanding, as if I'd stumbled into rewriting my will like someone accidentally ordering the wrong coffee. He spoke in that flat, rehearsed tone people use when they want to sound composed, but are boiling underneath. He asked about Joy, about her role, about how involved she'd become. He didn't ask about my feelings. He didn't ask if I was happy. Only what he needed to know to reestablish the shape of the story he preferred. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I said everything in the will reflects what I value now. There was a long pause on the line. He finally said, "We just feel blindsided." I almost laughed. Blindsided. I wanted to say you changed my locks with smiles. You emptied my drawers without asking. You gave away my piano like it was clutter, and I'm the one who blindsided you. But I didn't say that. I said, you weren't blind. You just weren't looking. He didn't respond. Not really. Just mumbled something about talking again soon. And then he hung up. Later that night, my daughter called. Her voice was softer, trembling with that performative ache I'd learned to recognize long ago. She told me she was hurt. She said she wished I'd talked to her first. I did, I said gently. You just weren't listening. She started crying then, not sobbing, just a thin, strained weep that made me feel both sad and strangely distant, like I was watching her from far away. I remembered the toddler version of her, the one who'd cry when I said no to a second cookie. That same helpless outrage, the same disbelief that the answer wasn't going to change just because she didn't like it. I always loved you, she said through tears. I thought we were close. And I believe she did, in her way. But love that suffocates isn't closeness, it's possession. So I told her the truth. I know you love me, but you loved me more when I was quiet. And that's not closeness, that's comfort. She didn't like that. She told me Joy had manipulated me, that I was making decisions in a vulnerable state. She called the will change a betrayal. I didn't get angry. I let her say her piece, let her run out of justifications, and then I said, you all tried to keep me safe in a way that made me feel erased. Joy let me feel seen. And that's why she's in the will. I didn't hang up. I just let that be the last word. When the call ended, I sat in my chair and felt lighter, not triumphant, not smug, just free. That week they came by less. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like absence. It felt like a clean break, like a wound starting to scar. I noticed other things too. My plants looked greener. The curtains stayed the way I liked them. The air smelled of lavender and soil again, not antiseptic and plastic. My own music played in the background, not theirs. My books were dog-eared and stacked just how I liked them. I had reclaimed my home one tiny rebellion at a time. And Joy, she didn't change. She didn't act differently once she knew what I'd done. She still brought me tea, still listened to my stories, still asked how I wanted to spend the day. Not once did she mention the will. Not once did she ask for anything. One afternoon, I asked her why she stayed so quiet about it, why she didn't react. She smiled and said, because that was your choice. And I trust you. It floored me how simple that was. I trust you. Such a small phrase, But when you've been doubted, overruled, rewritten, it becomes sacred. The aftermath of honesty isn't always applause. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's silence you didn't expect to last. But beneath all that, there's a steadiness that grows when you finally choose your truth over someone else's comfort. And that's what I was building now, not revenge, not bitterness. Just a life made honest again. The day I signed the final documents, the air felt different, thicker, like something invisible had been holding its breath. The lawyer came to the house that morning. I wore the gold pin your father gave me on our 30th anniversary, and the shawl I wasn't supposed to wear outside anymore. It was frayed, faded in places, but it carried the scent of old winters and long stories. It was mine. We sat at the kitchen table. I reviewed every line one last time, my eyes scanning the places where my children's names used to be. Not removed entirely, no, I hadn't disinherited them. I didn't want to be cruel. I simply rebalanced the scales, a smaller portion, enough for them to know I hadn't shut the door, just drawn a line in the floor. What had been given freely before would now be earned through memory, not assumed by entitlement. And Joy, her name written there in clean black ink, stood steady and calm beside me. She had dressed simply as always, her sweater soft and sleeves rolled above her wrists, as if she might still knead bread or fold laundry after. But her eyes gave her away. When I signed the last page, she looked down, then away. I thought for a moment she was trying not to smile. But then I realized she was crying. Not loudly, not theatrically, just 1-2 tears slipping down like rain off old glass. I reached for her hand. Hers was warm and trembling. I thought maybe she'd speak, that she'd say something noble or humble or embarrassed. But all she said was, "Why me?" I took a breath and answered in a voice that surprised even myself. "Because when everyone else tried to keep me safe, you made me feel alive." She looked down again, pressing her lips together, like she didn't trust them to behave. I saw it then, not joy exactly, and not guilt, but something quieter. Reverence, maybe. That trembling recognition that someone had seen you clearly and honored you for it. Joy had given me so many small freedoms, things no one else had thought to offer. She had let me fail without fear, let me remember without correction, let me laugh at my own stories even when they went nowhere. She let me choose, and in return I gave her the thing they all thought belonged to them, the weight of my last say. When the lawyer left, the house was quiet again. Not somber, not heavy, just still. Joy and I sat on the porch afterward, a cup of tea between us, the wind combing through the garden where the mint and violets had started to bloom again. She didn't say much, neither did I. That's the thing about trust, it doesn't need performance. It doesn't need to fill every moment. Eventually she spoke. "I never wanted anything from you," she whispered. "I know," I said. She turned to me, her brow tight with worry. "What if they hate me?" I shook my head slowly. "Then they never understood me to begin with, and that's not your burden to carry." I paused, looking out at the fading sky, and said, "They always thought I was theirs to manage, but I never was. I belonged to no one." And now she asked. I smiled. Now I belong to myself. There was a freedom in that moment I hadn't felt in decades, not the kind that comes with travel or wealth or even time, but the kind that's rooted in sovereignty, the sacred, often stolen sense that your life is yours even in old age, especially in old age. Later, I sat alone in my bedroom and opened the drawer beside my bed. I pulled out the first list I ever wrote in the quiet hours of frustration. Things they've taken. I read each item slowly, letting the sorrow rise and fall like the breath of something once wounded. Then I turned to the last page, the one I'd added not long ago, things I've reclaimed. My name, my mornings, my music, my decisions, my voice, my garden, my body, my final say. And now this, my legacy. There were no parades, no applause, no one shouting, "Well done." But I didn't need that. I didn't need validation. I had tears that weren't mine, a hand held without expectation, a name spoken not with reverence, but with respect. I had joy, and in giving her something, I had taken something back. Not just power, permission, to live the rest of my days on my terms, to say quietly and without apology, I was not erased. I was not owned. I was not done. I've come to love the silence. Not the hollow kind, the one they left behind when they stopped calling, so often stopped dropping by with their notepads and assumptions, but the quiet that I chose, the silence I earned. It wraps around the house like an old shawl, familiar and warm. It doesn't press in on me anymore. It doesn't accuse. It listens. The house is slower now. I rise when I wish. I sit by the window without urgency. I take my tea at a pace that has nothing to do with time. There are no schedules taped to the fridge, no weekly plans crafted in the names of efficiency and structure. Just a life lived one careful breath at a time. Joy comes and goes without ceremony. Sometimes we sit together in the garden and say nothing at all, and that's enough. She's never once asked me about the will since that day. I think she understands that the true gift wasn't what I gave her on paper. It was what we built between us without anyone watching. The trust, the dignity, the mutual choosing. My children have changed. Not entirely, but they're quieter too. Perhaps it's shock, perhaps it's guilt, maybe even reflection. The few times they visited since they come softer. They sit longer. My daughter no longer rearranges things. My son doesn't speak over me the way he used to. There's a wary respect in their eyes now, like they've discovered a cliff where they thought there was only a hill. But I don't hold it against them, not anymore. I've let go of the need for them to understand fully. Some people only see your worth when you stop letting them define it. I don't keep the censor system they gifted me. I took it down the day after the will was signed. Joy helped me box it up. It's in the garage now, beneath a sheet, next to a pile of books. I may read again one day. I don't need to be monitored. I don't need to be managed. I just need to be trusted. I spend more time in the garden now. The roses came back this year, fierce and full like they'd been waiting for permission. Sometimes I talk to your father out there, not with words, but with memory. I'll touch a bloom and remember how he used to bring me cuttings in a chipped mug. I'll run my hands through the herbs and recall how he laughed when I oversalted the stew. The house breathes again. It creaks when it wants to. It hums in the afternoon. The wind sings through the open windows, and I let it. Because now it's mine again. My life. My voice. My choice. I keep the will in the drawer, of course, safe, notarized, bound. But I don't think about it much anymore, because that paper wasn't the change. It was just the mark of the change. The real shift happened inside me in those quiet, aching mornings when I finally remembered that love, without respect, is just control in disguise. I think of other women like me sometimes, alone, managed, spoken for, and I want to whisper to them, "You are not fragile. You are not finished. You are not theirs to edit." I wish someone had whispered it to me sooner. But maybe that's the point of age. Maybe this is what wisdom looks like. Not big declarations, not grand gestures, but the slow, steady return to your own skin, your own say. Some nights I light a candle not for ceremony, just for comfort. I sit in the armchair I chose myself, not the ergonomic one they brought in. I sip tea I made the old way, steeped too long, sweetened just right. And I listen to the quiet. Not the kind they left me with, but the kind I claimed. A silence not born from absence, but from presence. A silence that doesn't hurt. A silence that says you did it, you remembered. And in that silence I rest. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to remember my worth. Some endings are just beginnings with the noise turned off. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace. Now the days move like old songs, slow, familiar, full of pauses that don't need to be filled. I walk through the house with bare feet and unhurried thoughts. There is no need to explain, no need to justify. What's done is done, and for once it feels like enough. The windows stay open more often now. The air moves gently through the curtains, lifting them like breaths I forgot I was allowed to take. The garden hums with bees again. The violets that Joy planted have taken root in places I didn't expect, just like she did. Just like this version of myself did. Quietly, steadily, without asking permission. At night I rest in a bed, no longer pressed by guilt or obligation. I no longer lie awake wondering if I am enough, if I've been too much or not enough, or too difficult to love. I don't weigh my worth against the approval of those who once spoke over me. I don't shrink. I don't wait. I remember now love should never sound like control. It should never come with rules shaped like concern. The deepest kind of love is the kind that lets you be whole even when you're messy, even when you're slow, even when you forget the name of a song, but remember exactly how it made you feel. If I could leave one thing behind, not money, not furniture, not even this house, it would be this quiet kind of knowing, the kind that says, you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to begin again, even at the end. You are allowed to choose peace, even if others call it selfish. You are allowed to be your own. And now finally I am. The sun sets soft through the kitchen window. The light bends just so across the floorboards, catching the edges of things I used to think were gone forever. But they're not. I was never gone. Just waiting. Just listening. Just gathering the strength to come back home to myself. And now I have.